You're listening to Islam for Life with Shaykh Walead Mosaad. This podcast is brought to you by Seekers Hub Global. You can subscribe to this podcast and all of our other podcasts on iTunes, Google Play, or on our website, seekershub.fm. Visit seekershub.org for free online courses, our reliable answer service, and engaging media.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. وأفضل الصلوات وتم التسليمات على سيد الأمة ونبي الرحمة وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين وبعد. So, this class we're going to read from what is referred to as the Hikam ibn Ata'illah Sakandari rahimahullah, or the aphorisms or wisdoms of the Imam Ahmad ibn Ata'illah as-Sakandari, or the Skandarani, from Alexandria, even though he came from North Africa, but he settled eventually in Egypt and specifically Alexandria before heading to Cairo, where he spent his last years and where he is buried today at the foot of the Muqattam hill in central Cairo. And this is probably, without hyperbole, one of the most studied and commented upon book the Ummah has seen, especially since the 7th or 8th century of the Hijrah, when Imam ibn Ata'illah Sakandari lived. And the reason for this is primarily, from kind of a level of divine success and mercy, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chose this particular man in this particular book to be something of a resource. So we describe it not just a book of this particular person, but it's a book of the ummah, kitab ummah, right? And you could think of, obviously, the Quran as also being the most important book of the ummah, although it's unlike any other book. And all of the compilations of the hadith, the recordings of the sayings of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, kutub ummah, they are the books of the community. So even though there are names attached to them, even though we say Sahih al-Bukhari, Imam Ismail al-Bukhari, or Sahih Muslim, Naysapuri, they are not limited to the specific individuals. So especially when we talk about things that are not just books, but methodologies. So when we say fiqh al-Imam Abu Hanifa, right, the fiqh of Imam Abu Hanifa, or Malik, or Shafi'i, Ahmad ibn Hanbal, Awza'i, so forth, we're not talking about the specific individual, we're talking about the ummah. And this is very important because there is a very aggressive, I would say, deconstructionist movement coming from both Muslims and non-Muslims, who are trying to disparage all of that. And one of the things that they do is to say, well, this is one man, one person. He could have been right, he could have been wrong. Who is Bukhari? Right? He did some work, and like any other academic that we would subject to criticism, then it's possible that he made a lot of mistakes, and they take it from this point. And the problem with that is, no, it's not just one person, right? This has become canon. It has become the book of the ummah. These are books by which we identify who we are. So they're not just the works of just one person. They're not just the works of an individual. They have seen acceptance, review and acceptance, broad consensual acceptance, right? Over centuries until now, and remain so, to have this broad consensus of acceptance. And so we don't just see them as books of individuals, right? They have been thoroughly investigated, read, studied. They used to read al-Bukhari as even just for tabarruk, right? In times of difficulty and in times of strife, they would say, well, if we read Sahih al-Bukhari in this very difficult time of civil strife, or whatever type of strife it is, then inshallah the burden will be lifted, the trial, the tribulation will be lifted. So I see the book of the Hikam as one of those books. Why? Because number one, as I said, it has this broad acceptance. There are probably at least maybe 100, 200, 300 commentaries on it. One man alone did about 30 of them. Sidi Ahmed Zarruq, who lived sometime after that from Morocco, wrote, he said, I would carry the Hikam with me in travel and when I would be resident somewhere, and I would always be completing a commentary upon it. And so, there are maybe at least 4 or 5 of these commentaries published, but there are so many others that are still manuscripts. And each one is different than the other, right? One of the things when people's words are given divine success and acceptance is that the words keep giving long after the person who wrote them is gone. So very much like the words of our Prophet ﷺ, right? And this was described with the Prophet ﷺ, إِنَّمَا أُوتِيتُ جَوَامِعَ الْكَلِمِ, I have been given jawama al-kalim, right? Which means few words, but jawama, comprehensive meanings, right? That just keep giving and giving and giving. And of course, above all else, the Quran is like this, right? Sayyidina Ali said the Quran has a zahir and has a batin and has a had and has a matla, right? It has a zahir, a literal purport. It has a batin, subtle meanings associated with it. It has a had. It has definitive things about it, and has a matla, and it's a point of embarkment, going on to other meanings. Imam al-Ghazali described the Quran, if you just stick to the zahir, just to the literal meaning of the words, it's like someone who's just standing on the shore of the beach, of the seashore, and you have the, as the waves come in and they make the little bubbles, al-raghwa that come in, or ghutha that come in. That's all they've seen. They haven't actually delved into the ocean, right? They haven't taken a dive and seen the coral and the reefs and and all the different sorts of wildlife that are there, and the jewels and the pearls and so forth. They haven't seen any of that. So this deen has been, it's a blessing. It's been given to us, and it's going to keep giving. It keeps giving. But like anything that's worthy, that's worthwhile, it has secrets that need to be unlocked. And sometimes people who just stand at the door and don't see how to get in, they'll dismiss it. But nevertheless, that doesn't mean that there's nothing behind the door, right? There's a lot there. So the Hikam is a book like that, and it was written by Ibn Atha, and it's kind of a genre that began before him. There are other people who penned books like the Hikam. In other words, what he does basically is give you sort of these discrete, short aphorisms, and we know that people before that, anyone who's been to a Chinese restaurant and opened up a fortune cookie knows that Confucius says, he who eats with one hand in the morning will eat 2 in the night, or whatever he says, or something like that. I just made that up. I don't know if he actually says that, but there's kind of these type of meanings associated with it in these small words. So what others have called the wisdom tradition, and the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ has been described as hikmah, right? Utul kitab wal hikmah, right? He's been given the book and the hikmah. So that means the Sunnah is all wisdom. But also this Sunnah that's all wisdom, it needs to be articulated for each particular circumstance and group, right? One of the mistakes that some Muslims make is they see the particular way it was articulated in the time of the Prophet ﷺ, and they only see the zahir. They only see the outward aspect of it, and they don't see the meanings behind it. And so they'll think that it's appropriate to tread on the masjid carpet with their shoes, because they read the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ that the Sahaba used to go inside with their ni'al, with their sandals, and enter the mosque like this. And they said, well, then that seems to be the Sunnah. But also the Sunnah was that they didn't have carpet, and that the inside of the mosque was like the outside. There was no difference. It was just kind of a demarcation to go from one to the next, right? But the meanings in like an-nidhafa min al-iman, cleanliness is from iman, right? And khudu zinatakum 'inda kulli masjid, right? Take your adornment at every mosque, at every masjid, are also meanings. So the Sunnah has to be understood holistically, and not just piecemealed out for something that's going to support a particular point of yours, which is, the folly of many who do that. Both Muslims and non-Muslims alike make that mistake. And the deen, you have to take all of it in order even to get the benefit of some of it. Or knowledge in general, they say, doesn't give you some of it until you give it all of yourself. Right? There's no kind of half measures here. It has to be something that you're completely dedicated to, and understand that you're stepping on a vast, or beginning to step into a vast ocean, that if you were to spend the rest of your life and maybe 100 lifetimes after that, if you had the time, you still wouldn't get to the core of it. You still wouldn't get to, encompass all of it. So one approaches it with humility, I think, is very important. As for the subject of the book, quite plainly, it would be called tasawwuf. And I don't like translating tasawwuf as Sufism, because Sufism is a word that was penned more or less by Orientalist academics, and they meant something very peculiar about that, that I think existed more in their minds and in their books than it did in reality. But as far as the word tasawwuf, it means, and Zilruk says there's over 2,000 definitions for it. So there's no kind of agreement. And the reason they have 2,000 different definitions for it, because there are 2,000 merits or fruits or benefits of it at least. So some of them said at-tasawwuf al-akhlaq, some of them said at-tasawwuf tazkiyat al-nafs, some of them said it's good character, some of them said it's purification of the soul and the ego. Some of them said that it was, or it is for your alaniya to be like your sarira, or your sarira to be like your alaniya, so that your inward state is like that of the outward. Some of them said that it is to be indifferent to the machinations of the khalq, and to be completely in tune with the khaliq, with the creator. So as you can see, the general meaning then is to put the heart in a state so that it's in conformance with the natural balance and order of the world as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala decreed it. So it's more about looking at the sciences of the heart. Now?
Can you repeat that definition one more time?
Which one?
To put the heart in the state.
Yeah, that's my definition. I would say to put the heart in a state of balance with the natural order decreed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, trying to achieve that balance. Because we talk about following the Prophet ﷺ in his words and in his deeds, but he also had ahwal, he also had states, right? And that is not going to be, you will not avail yourself of that unless you are able to not just stop at the words and deeds, but dig deeper, right? To really embody the meanings behind the words and the deeds in order to capture some of the states, or to avail yourself of some of the states of the Prophet ﷺ. So one of the things that Sufism is often associated, and I say Sufism or tasawwuf, or its detractors would say, is like, well, there's some problems with it, shirkiyat, there's maybe some shirk in it, maybe they have too much emphasis on dhikr, and they're not into the dunya, quburiyun, they love to visit graves, and there's like a little shirk going on with that, and all of these kind of fallacious accusations. I would say to all of that these are all things that are on the periphery of what is actually at the heart of it, right? And if we look at to what the heart of it is, it's the heart, right? It's being the best version of yourself. It's actually about what I would say, actualizing tawheed. So tawheed is a word that's actually an active participle. وَحَّدَ يُوَحِّدُ تَوْحِيدًا. Generally from our Sunday school experiences, we think tawheed, that's the 6 pillars, and most children could probably rattle them off, right? And then they said, okay, we know tawheed. It's not, that's the basic entrance card to tawheed. It's not tawheed itself. Tawheed is an active thing, right? Tawheed is to see nothing and to be consumed by nothing in its purest form, except by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And not to see anything else. تَعْبُدَ اللَّهَ كَأَنَّكَ تَرَاهُ, right? Described as ihsan in the famous Jibril hadith. فَإِن لَمْ تَكُنْ تَرَاهُ فَإِنَّهُ يَرَاكَ. Right? Ihsan is another meaning of tasawwuf. And so to arrive at that particular state, right? تَعْبُدَ اللَّهَ كَأَنَّكَ تَرَاهُ. It's a modality, it's a way of doing it. The previous questions listed things. اخبرني عن الإيمان or اخبرني عن الإسلام اخبرني عن الإيمان. Prophet ﷺ mentioned what Islam, the 5 basic pillars for that particular context, and then he talked about the 6 pillars as we said. But then when he said ihsan, it wasn't a list. It was a description that's supposed to underlie the 5 plus 6 other things mentioned when he talked about Iman and Islam. تعبد الله كأنك تراه. Right? So when you pray, it's like you're seeing Allah. When you fast, it's like you're seeing Allah. When you pay zakah, it's like you're seeing Allah. So that means when you pay zakah, you can infer from that, I'm not really giving, and that person's actually not receiving, because the one who's the true owner of all the wealth is Allah. And if that's the case, then that person's not really receiving in the reality of things, even though ostensibly I'm giving and the faqir is receiving. But then if I see it like that, then why should I have men? Why does the Quran tell us لا تبطلوا صدقاتكم بالمن والأذى كالذي ينفق ماله رئاء الناس. Do not corrupt or invalidate, probably a better word, your sadaqat, your charity, بالمن والأذى. Men, right, من الامتنان, it means I feel like he should be grateful to me. That's what men means. والأذى, and hurt. How do we give? Do we say تعال يا فقير تعال تعال? Do we belittle them, right? Do we, what we call izdira? Do we, do we look at them? Oh, okay, fine. I'll take pity on you here. Come here. Let me give you $2. Now get out of here. And then we say that's sadaqah. Adha, right? لا تبطلوا صدقاتكم بالمن والأذى. So the verse is saying we are giving. It's not denying the idea that you're giving sadaqat, but the problem is the way that you're doing it is not right. Why does the Quran always talk about what? يا أيها الذين آمنوا أقيموا الصلاة وآتوا الزكاة. Right? إقامة الصلاة. It doesn't say صلوا, it doesn't say just pray, physical activity of prayer, but إقامة الصلاة. Right? Do the prayer in تقيمه, establish it, anchor it, do it in the best way. That's إقامة. When the Prophet ﷺ saw the man who prayed, he prayed. The hadith says he prayed in Bukhari. Prophet ﷺ said to him, "Irja فَإنَّكَ لَمْ تُصَلِّ." Go back, you didn't pray. And he did this 3 times. Then he comes back the last time, and the man says to the Prophet ﷺ, "Ya Rasulullah, la ahsinu ghayra." I don't know how to do any better than this. Ya Rasulullah, tell me. He said, if you pray, if you stand, then stand still and don't move until you are firm standing, and don't go into ruku' until you are firm in the ruku'. When you do sujood, the same thing, right? Add this tuma'nina, right? You have to be settled and tranquil and serene in your prayer in order to avail yourself of the benefits of the prayer. So it's not just praying, but it's how you pray. So to close the loop, coming back to the subject of this book, it's about actualizing these things, right? Improving the internal states. And every single one of these hikam, you will find something for it in the Quran and Sunnah. But I also believe that Ibn Ata lived these ahwal. I don't believe there's a way he could have talked about them unless he actually lived them. He went through them. So the transmission of Islam and Islamic sciences, while indeed there's a textual component to it, and Muslims tend to emphasize that part, Quran Sunnah, till they beat us over the head with it. Not to take away from the Quran and Sunnah, it's very important. But there is the experiential aspect. There's the human aspect. Right? The Mus'haf just sitting in the corner there by itself, it's not doing anything until someone actually opens it and reads it and engages with it and interacts with it and embodies its meanings and follows its commandments and avoids its prohibitions. Then it's doing something. So there's a human element there. So it's not just the text, but it's also how we go about interpreting, understanding, and practicing the text. And so the experiential aspects of the deen are very important. And there's a 1,400 years of experience that came before where people actually were engaging with the Quran and Sunnah to the degree that these openings happened for them. And then we're blessed enough that they actually wrote them down, right? And then it got transmitted to us. So it's from the deen, it's not something from outside of the deen. The source, the spring is the Quran and Sunnah, no one is denying that. But, don't avoid the flowers and the garden and the trees and all the things that grew out from it and say, well, that's not the Quran and Sunnah. Where do you think they came from? Right? This well fed all of that. It sprouted all of these things. So, going back to Sayyidina Ibn Ata al-Sakandari, even though this book is a book of tasawwuf and not to get too much detail about tariqah and all that type of thing, he did belong to a particular kind of methodology or tariqah, the Shadhili one, but it's accepted that the Hikam are much more general than that. Even though you can say it's the khulasa, it's kind of the epitome of the teachings of Abu Hassan al-Shadhili, radiallahu anhu. But nevertheless, if you look to the silsila, the chain from where Abu Hassan al-Shadhili took, he took from all of the other great teachers too. Down 2 or 3 or 4 people down his silsila is Sayyid Abdul Qadir al-Jilani. And go down a little bit further and then you have some, Dhul Nun al-Misri. And then go a little further, then you get to the Tabi'een, Hassan al-Basri, Sayyidina Ali, the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Right? So, كُلٌّ مِّن رَسُولِ اللَّهِ مُلْتَمِسٌ, as the Burda says, everyone is taking from the messenger, the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So there's roughly, I think, 296 or so. I always get confused between that and the Bukhari, since I'm working on both of them. Or 264. So here's 264 aphorisms. And the way I read them and the way that I read them with my teachers is that they kind of go in order. Some people have done modern renderings of the Hikam and put them in different order, which I think is a mistake. Because he wrote them in that particular order because it's kind of taking you on a path. So each one is, think of it as a 264-step program. Each step is kind of taking you to a different place incrementally. Or as my dentist would say, what's it called in Vaseline trays? Invisalign. You get a tray for each week, right? And because it takes you incrementally to the end, you can't just jump to a week 70 or week 40, whatever the end of it is, and when you have perfect teeth, but you go incrementally. So there's kind of, I would say, periodic increments here and taking people in their understanding. But always the first one, like I haven't actually done the Invisalign thing, I just heard about it. But I would assume that when you put on the first one, that's the most painful or the most annoying because you haven't actually put them on before and it's a little bit of shock to your system. So I see the first hikmah as like a shock to the system. It's disruptive a little bit because it challenges certain assumptions. So when Ibn Ata rahimahullah says, من علامات الاعتماد على العمل نقصان الرجاء عند وجود الزلل. For amongst the signs of dependence upon pious works is a diminishment of hope upon the occurrence of a misstep. This has to be unpacked a little bit. From amongst the signs, this is my own translation. If you have another one, that's okay. I'm sure it's similar. Amongst the signs of dependence upon pious works is a diminishment of hope upon the occurrence of a misstep. So first here it talks about a couple things. There's this thing called hope. There's this thing called dependence, pious works, and missteps or mistakes. But what stands out first when we look at it is we get the feeling that depending upon your good works is not a good thing. It's negative because it seems to put in a negative tone, right? Amongst the signs of dependence upon pious works is diminishment of hope upon the occurrence of a misstep. And it's interesting because the emphasis usually for most, especially with our children and people around us, is when we talked about Islam and Deen, we're always emphasizing not mistakes, but doing the right thing, doing the good thing. Make sure you pray, make sure you're paying the zakah, make sure you're fasting Ramadan, make sure you're doing all those things right. But yet, Imam al-Sakandari here starts with talking about sins. Something that It's a mistake. And he's telling us there is an associated hal, there's an associated inner state with even when we make a mistake, how we should feel about it. Which to me is rather liberating, because it's saying, guess what, you're going to make mistakes. So the point then is not whether you make a mistake or not, but how does it affect you? How does it affect the hal? How does it affect the state that you're in? So if you lose hope, or your hope is diminished, it decreases because you made a mistake, then something's not right. Something's not right. But intuitively we think, well, doesn't Iman increase and decrease? And when I make a mistake, don't I feel bad about myself? And maybe I feel like, oh, I'm a little bit closer to the fire than I am to paradise, because, if it's like a line, and here's paradise and here's hellfire, so I pray, okay, one step closer. I make a mistake, okay, I go back a step and I'm closer to hellfire. Isn't that how it works? No, it's not how it works. Clearly, Ibn Ata al-Sikandari is telling us that's not how it works. Because then that would be a sign, which is a negative thing, that you have i'timad ala al-amal, that you are dependent upon your deeds. But then you say, well, aren't we supposed to do good deeds? So what's the problem if I'm dependent upon them? Right? Because Allah tells me, اعملوا صالحا الذين يعملون الصالحات يؤمنون بالله ويعملون الصالحات ادخلوا الجنة بما كنتم تعملون. طيب, where's the issue here? The issue is, this book and this knowledge is describing a particular path. And it wants to take you on the path of Rasulullah. And it wants to take you on the path of shukr and mahabba, gratitude and love. And the path of gratitude and love was clearly outlined by the Prophet ﷺ. When Aisha found him praying, in the hadith that we all know, and he had been standing in prayer very long, till his calves were swollen or bleeding. And she said to him, Ya Rasulullah, lima taf'al dhalik? Ya, O Messenger of Allah, why are you doing this? وَقَدْ غَفَرَ اللَّهُ لَكَ مَا تَقَدَّمَ مِنْ ذَنْبِكَ وَمَا تَأَخَّرَ. Why are you doing this? And Allah has already forgiven your previous sins and your future ones that are non-existent to begin with. So look at the premise of the question of Aisha, because it's the same premise as this hadith, as this hikmah, namely that we're doing these things, these deeds, because I want to please God. I want to please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and I'll get closer to paradise. But if you don't have any sins, then Ya Rasulullah, why are you overexerting yourself? Right? There's no need for you to do extra. You're already there. You've already been promised paradise. All your sins have been forgiven and you have no sins to begin with. So why are you doing it? What did he say? أَفَلَا أَكُونَ عَبْدًا شَكُورًا? Should I not be a grateful servant? Right? That's why they say shukr, which is a hal, gratitude, it's أول مقام المحبين. It's the first station of the lovers. All the ones before that are about denial and pain, to put it bluntly. Sabr is about pain. Right? When we say someone who's lost something, أخي اصبر احتسب أجرك عند الله كذا. Ya أخي, have patience, your reward with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Why do we say words like that? أنا متألم. I'm in pain. I have a loss. I'm disturbed by it. Right? But when you get to shukr, it's not about pain anymore. It's about recognition that everything that comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is a blessing, whether we realize it or not. And so I should be thankful for that blessing. So then the mode by which I understand Allah, by which I worship Him, is based upon showing my gratitude for those blessings. When you're grateful to someone and you want to show that gratitude, you love them. Right? And love is to give without expecting anything in return. That's love. Anything else is not love. I'm not talking about romantic love. that false love, right? Like, okay, I love you, now do you feel the same? And then if you don't get the response, oh, okay, and now I hate you. You just said you love me, but not because I didn't say I love you back, now you hate me? How does that work? Right? That's not, what? What's that? That's not love. Love is to give without not just expectation of anything in return, but you don't care about something in return. The very expression itself is all that you're into. So Imam Ibn Ata al-Sakandari wants to take us from this first hikmah to the 264th one, where we arrive at that point and we have actualized our tawheed. And then it's all about just giving and recognizing and seeing the blessings in everything. And then we would be like what the verse says, إِنَّ أَوْلِيَاءَ اللَّهِ لَا خَوْفٌ عَلَيْهِمْ وَلَا هُمْ يَحْزَنُونَ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَكَانُوا يَتَّقُونَ لَهُمُ الْبُشْرَى فِي الْحَيَاةِ الدُّنْيَا وَفِي الْآخِرَةِ. Right? The awliya Allah, لَا خَوْفٌ عَلَيْهِمْ وَلَا هُمْ يَحْزَنُونَ. They have no fear, nor do they grieve. Khawf is fear of something in the future. Nor do they grieve the past. In other words, they're living in the present. They see the moment, the present. And from the divine perspective, there is no past, there is no future. Time doesn't apply to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? So it's becoming balanced with that ru'yah, with that way of seeing things and seeing the divine order. So once they are the awliya, لا خوف عليهم ولا هم يحزنون. What do? الذين آمنوا وكانوا يتقون. The ones who believed and had taqwa. That's the path. So here, as I described earlier, the disruptive kind of shocking hikmah or aphorism, the first one, من علامات الاعتماد على العمل نقصان رجاء وجود الزلل. Amongst the signs of dependence upon pious works is a diminishment of hope upon the occurrence of a misstep. So if our dependence should not be upon our deeds, then what should be upon? And the answer to that, we know on a rational perspective, but do really know it. We depend on none but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The Prophet ﷺ told the Sahaba, لا يدخل أحدكم الجنة بعمله. None of you will enter paradise by your works. They said, إلا برحمته, except by the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They said, even you, Ya Rasulullah? He said, حتى أنا, even me. إلا أن يتغمني الله برحمته, except if Allah encompasses me in His mercy. So the dependence then is upon the mercy of God, of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And here's a subtle point. Because if you believe that your works على وجه الحقيقة, right? In other words, in the truest sense, is what's going to bring you to paradise or to the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then that implies you think you're deserving of it. Or you're entitled to it. What is called istihqaq. An entitlement is not compatible with a heart that's humble. To say, I deserve this. Why do you deserve this? Because look what I've done. What have you done? Did you not hear about the man mentioned in the previous umam? And he was asked, how would you like to enter paradise? And the man responded, and people used to live hundreds of years. He said, well, I've been in sujood like 500 years, so no brainer. I'll go with my deeds. I've lived in a cave. I've done no harm to anybody, right? And there's my slate is clean. No brainer, ya Allah. I'll go with my deeds. And he's all smiling and happy and thinking, this is my commentary on the hadith. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says to the angels, okay, weigh his deeds on one side and weigh one ni'mah, one blessing I've given him, the blessing of sight, on the other, and let's see which one is heavier. And the blessing of sight was much heavier. And then they start to drag him off to hell. They start to drag him off to hell. And he said, wait, not with my deeds. By your mercy, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, by your mercy. There's no other way. By your mercy. Why? Because he had a feeling of entitlement. He said, this is what I deserve. أستحق ذلك. استحقاق. I'm entitled to this. I should be given this. It's not a heart compatible with humility or the truest sense of tawheed. Because Allah is the one who gives and Allah is the one who takes away. Allah is the one who gave you the ability to worship Him, who gave you the tawfiq, the divine success in actually doing that to begin with. So how then could you seek reward for something that He was totally responsible for to begin with? You cannot. So then it becomes a question of mushahada. Notice in the part about ihsan, ta'bud Allah ka'annaka tara, ru'ya. Worship Allah as you see Him. The ulama of tasawwuf, they call that mushahada. To shahid, to witness it. So then your life becomes about witnessing. Witnessing what? Witnessing all the good, witnessing all the blessings, witnessing all the ni'am, witnessing all the mercy, witnessing the good in everything. عجبا للمؤمن أمره كله خير. Who's that? Who is the one, the believer, that everything is good for him? How bewildering. Because he's in a state of witness. He's in a state, or she's in a state of mushahada. Just seeing things as they really are. That's why the hadith said, رؤيا ترى كأنك ترى, as you see Him. So it's real. That's the real part. That means everything else is a mirage. You being affiliated with the things that you do and thinking that you deserve things because of your good works, that's a mirage. That's not the real thing. The real thing is Allah. Because we are contingent beings. Our existence is contingent upon His choosing us to be existing and continuing to exist. So how then could that contingent being be the one who is responsible for all that is happening here? Has to be Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There's no comparison. So then this nuqsan ir-raja, then taking the other side of it, that means if I make a mistake, right? That means if I do something good, still look toward Allah's mercy. Not like, oh, look at me, I deserve. That's one side of it. Well, what's the flip side of it? Well, if I make a mistake, should I say all is lost? And I should be in a state of despair? No. Because comparing Allah's mercy to the mistake you made, there's also no comparison. And this is the balance. So if it's always dependence upon Allah, on the level of the ultimate reality, your deeds, your good deeds and your sins have absolutely no effect upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They don't change Him. You can't change Him. You can't make Him disappointed or angry or happy in the sense that we think. Right? When we say ridha Allah, when we say the contentment or acceptance of Allah, we're talking about acceptance of our deeds, that they become accepted, that they're sincere. That's what we mean by nurdi Rabbina, that we want to please Him, that we do things sincerely, solely for Him. Then we will be rewarded for the sincerity in those things. And by the same token, when we make a mistake, when we slip up, then we know also that it's not a state of despair, because Allah is still the same merciful being that He was before you made the mistake. And so He's not angry in the sense that now He's going to punish you and destine you to hellfire because you made a mistake. He's still the same being before. So all that means is look to the mercy of God, of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when you make that particular mistake. And, we were created to make mistakes. Everybody makes mistakes. Even the awliya. But on a level that we wouldn't consider it to be a mistake, like in the sense of a sin. Right? But it would be in the sense of that, there's always a higher place you can be. There's always a higher understanding. So one of the veils of one of the higher veils is thinking that there's nothing beyond where you're at. Thinking that you've arrived. Like, oh, look, subhanAllah, look at this understanding. I really see everything, and wow, I can't imagine there's anything better than this. Then, you have diminished the divine qudra. Because Allah can give even more than what you think you have right now. Right? So, what did Abu Bakr as-Siddiq was attributed of saying? Al-ajiz al-idrak idrak. Understanding that you don't have the ability to comprehend and see the end of everything is comprehension of itself. So there's an element of what we call tawheed, an element of putting complete agency in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and saying, I don't comprehend that. And I may not get to a comprehension of that, but I know nevertheless it's true and it exists and it can be there for some people, even though it's not there for me right now. So العجز عن الإدراك إدراك سيدنا أبو بكر الصديق. Usually المنتسب لأبو بكر الصديق. So that was the first hikmah. Those of you who have done this with me before know I kind of go kind of slow. So I also wanted this session to be kind of a little lighter and open it up for more questions and discussion, things like that. So I'm going to stop here, inshallah, and then if people have questions or something like that, then I'm very happy. And hopefully there'll be himma to continue into the coming weeks, bi'idhnillah, at least till Ramadan, bi'idhnillah. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen.
Thank you for listening to Islam for Life with Shaykh Walead Mosaad. If you like this podcast, we'd appreciate if you left us a review on iTunes and Google Play. Help Seekers Hub spread the light of guidance to millions around the world by supporting us through monthly donations by going to seekershub.org/donate. Your donations are tax deductible in the US and Canada.